The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep hum that vibrated through the bones of every creature present. Kim Day stepped through the entrance, his black diplomatic robes flowing behind him as he walked toward the human delegation seats. Behind him, Yoon Hana followed quietly, her sharp eyes scanning the room as always. Around them, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy were taking their places. The chamber was enormous, with curved walls that stretched up into darkness above. Floating platforms held delegates from species that preferred different atmospheres, while the main floor accommodated those who breathed the standard mix. Kim. They had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. He knew the routine well. Every species had to go through security checks before entering the sacred chamber. The Grexmore warriors had their deadly claws covered with special sheaths. The crystalline Velther had their natural spikes dulled to prevent them from being used as weapons. The gas-breathing Zephyrians had their toxic breath filtered. Even the peaceful melody folk had their hypnotic voices dampened by special callers. But humans? They just walked through the scanners and took their seats. Today was different, though. Kin Day noticed a new face among the Velther delegation. The being's crystal body sparkled with nervous energy, and his multifaceted eyes kept turning toward the human section. This was clearly his first council meeting. The session began like any other. Supreme Elder Zerikano, ancient beyond measure, called the gathering to order. His voice echoed through the chamber without need for amplification. "We gather today to discuss the trade disputes between Sectors 7 and 12, he announced. The new Velther delegate wasn't paying attention to trade talks. Kim Dae could see him whispering urgently to his companions, pointing at the human section. The other Velther were trying to quiet him, but their new colleague was growing more agitated by the moment. Finally, the crystal being stood up. Voice rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the elder's speech. "I object to these proceedings." The chamber fell silent. Even Elder Zeriganol paused, his ancient eyes focusing on the speaker. Breaking protocol during a session was serious. "Business. State your objection." Delegate Velther, the elder said carefully. The crystal being's name was Velther, just like his species. Kim Day made a mental note of that. "I object to the clear violation of our most sacred security protocols," Velther declared. "Every species in this chamber has been required to surrender their natural weapons or have them neutralized. Every species except one." All eyes in the chamber turned toward the human delegation. Kin Day felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, but he remained calm. Yoon Hana shifted slightly beside him, ready for whatever might come next. "The humans," Velther continued, his crystal body flickering with indignation, "walk into this chamber completely unchanged. They undergo no security modifications. They surrender no weapons. They are given special treatment that violates the very principles this council was founded on." Murmurs started throughout the chamber. Some delegates nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. Kim Day noticed that the older delegates, those who had been here for decades, were exchanging worried glances. Elder Zerikanol raised one of his many hands for silence. "Delegate Velther, you are new to our council. There are many protocols you have yet to understand. Then explain them to me." Velther shot back. "Explain why my spikes must be dulled while they keep their ... double quotes." He paused, looking at the humans more carefully. "While they keep whatever weapons they have hidden." Kim Day decided it was time to speak. He stood slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Elder Zerikanol, if I may address our colleagues' concerns?" The ancient being nodded. "You may speak, Ambassador Kim Day." Kim Day turned to face Velther directly. "I understand your confusion, Delegate. When humans first joined the Council 50 years ago, we followed the same security protocols as everyone else. We surrendered our weapons and underwent the same checks. Then why don't you now? Valther demanded. Because, Kim Day said quietly, the council decided it was unnecessary. Unnecessary? Valther's crystal body flared brighter. How can security be unnecessary? What makes humans so special that they don't need to follow the rules? Yoon Hana stood up beside Kim Day. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge that made several nearby delegates shift nervously. Perhaps the question isn't why we don't surrender our weapons, Delegate Valther. Perhaps the question is, what weapons? Do you think we have to surrender? The chamber grew even quieter. Valther looked confused. I don't understand. All species have natural weapons. Claws, teeth, poison, strength. What are yours? Kim Day and Yoon Hana exchanged a look. Around the chamber, the older delegates were looking increasingly uncomfortable. Some were whispering to their assistants. Others were making notes on their datapads. That, said Kim Day carefully, is a more complicated question than you might think. Elder Zerakanal's voice cut through the tension. This discussion is beyond the scope of today's session. We will return to the matter of trade disputes. But Valther wasn't finished. No, I demand an explanation. Why are humans treated differently? What are you all hiding from us? The Grexmore. Delegate next to Valther, an old warrior named Grexmore, put a clawed hand on the crystal being's arm. Even through the protective sheath, his grip looked firm. Friend, he said in his buzzing voice, some questions are better left unasked. Why? Valther turned to face him. Why should I not ask? We are all equals here. We all follow the same rules, don't we? Grexmore's compound eyes reflected sadness. We follow the rules that keep us safe, young one. All of us? Valther looked around the chamber, seeing the expressions on hundreds of faces. Fear, worry, and something else. Something that looked almost like pity. Safe from what? No one answered. Elder Zerakanal spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. The trade dispute between Sectors 7 and 12 requires immediate attention. All other matters are tabled until the appropriate time. The session continued, but Valther barely listened. His multifaceted eyes kept returning to the human delegation. Kim Day and Yoon Hana sat calmly in their seats, looking perfectly ordinary. They had no visible weapons, no obvious threats. They looked almost fragile compared to many of the other species in the chamber. So why did everyone seem afraid of them? As the meeting progressed, Valther began to notice other things. The way delegates would change their seating if they got too close to the humans. The way security forces kept a respectful distance from the human section. The way even the most aggressive species became polite and careful when addressing human delegates. When the session finally ended, Valther watched the humans leave. They walked out the same way they had come in, passing through the security. Scanners without any modifications, any checks, any surrendering of weapons. Elder Zerakanal approached him as the chamber emptied. Young Valther, a word of advice from one who has seen many cycles pass. Yes, Elder? Some protocols exist not because they are fair, but because they are necessary. Some questions should not be asked because the answers are too dangerous to. No. Valther's crystal body dimmed with confusion. But Elder, I still don't understand. What makes humans so different? What weapons could they possibly have that require such special treatment? Elder Zerakanal was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his ancient voice carried a weight that made Valther's crystal structure shiver. The most dangerous weapons, young one, are often the ones you cannot see. With that, the elder moved away, leaving Valther alone in the emptying chamber, more confused and curious than ever. 3 days after the council session, Valther stood outside the archive building, his crystal body reflecting the pale light of the station's artificial sun. The building was massive, housing thousands of years of galactic history and council. Records, If answers existed anywhere, they would be here. Inside, the archive was quiet, except for the soft humming of data storage units. Velther made his way to the main desk, where a human sat reading through holographic displays. The nameplate read, Park Ji-ho, Senior Archivist. Park Ji-ho looked up as Velther approached. He was middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. Good morning, Delegate Velther. How can I help you today? I need to access the Council security protocols, Velther said directly. Specifically, the records about weapon surrender requirements for different species. Park Ji-ho nodded and began typing on his console. That should be in the general access files. Let me pull those up for you. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic keyboard. After a moment, he frowned. That's odd. What's odd? The human-specific protocols appear to be classified. I've never seen that before. Park Ji-ho looked genuinely puzzled. I'm sorry, but I don't have the clearance to access those files. You'd need special permission from the Council Elders. Velther felt frustration building in his crystal core. Classified? Why would security protocols be classified? I don't know, Park Ji-ho admitted. In all my years here, I've never seen basic protocol information marked at that level. It's very unusual. Before Velther could respond, another voice spoke from behind him. Perhaps I can help with some context. Both beings turned to see Lee. Sora approaching. She was another human, younger than Park Ji-ho, with short black hair and intelligent eyes. Her badge identified her as a council psychologist, specializing in interspecies relations. Dr. Lei, Park Ji-ho said with a smile, this is Delegate Velther. He's trying to understand some of our security protocols. Lee Sora studied Velther carefully. You're the one who asked questions during the session 3 days ago. Yes, Velther replied. And no one will give me straight answers. What kind of answers are you looking for? I want to know why humans don't have to surrender their weapons like everyone else. I want to know why this information is classified. I want to know what everyone is so afraid of. Lee Sora was quiet for a moment, then gestured to a nearby seating area. Why don't we sit down? This might take a while. They moved to a corner of the archive, with comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. Lee Sora waited until they were all seated before speaking. I study how different species interact with each other, she began. It's my job to understand the psychological and social dynamics that keep the Council functioning peacefully. And what have you learned about humans? Velther asked. That's a complicated question, Lee Sora said carefully. But I can tell you what I've observed about how other species react to us. She activated a small holographic display on the table. Charts and graphs appeared, showing behavioral data from council sessions over the past 50 years. Look at this, she said, pointing to one chart. This shows stress hormone levels in various species during council sessions. Notice anything interesting? Velther studied the data. The levels spike whenever humans are speaking. Exactly. Not just when humans are being aggressive or threatening. Just when they're talking normally about routine matters. Park Ji-ho leaned forward, interested despite himself. I never knew that. There's more, Lee Sora continued, switching to another display. This shows seating patterns over time. Watch what happens when humans enter the chamber. The hologram showed a time-lapse view of delegates taking their seats. As the human section filled up, other species gradually moved their seats further away, creating an empty buffer zone around the human delegation. They don't even realize they're doing it, Lee Sora explained. It's completely unconscious behavior. Velther's crystal body flickered with confusion. But why? Humans don't look threatening. You're smaller than most species, weaker than many. Others. What causes this reaction? Lee Sora and Park Ji-ho exchanged a look. That, Lee Sora said slowly, is where things get complicated. I need to know, Velther insisted. Everyone keeps giving me hints and half-answers. I want the truth. Park Jiho typed something into his console. There is someone who might be able to help. Quainara is one of the oldest members of the council. She was here when humans first joined. The Eternal Speaker? Velther had heard of Quainara, but never met her. Her species lived for thousands of years, and she had been on the council longer than almost anyone. She might be willing to talk to you, Lee Sora said. But I should warn you, there are some things that happened in the early days that people prefer not to discuss. What kind of things? Events that changed how the council operates. Events that led to new protocols being established. Velther stood up, his crystal body resonating with determination. Where can I find her? An hour later, Velther stood in. The Garden of Memory, a peaceful area of the station where the oldest council members often came to think. Quainara was there, her ancient form resting beside a fountain that played soft, harmonious notes. Quainara as species looked somewhat like giant butterflies, but with multiple sets of wings and eyes that could see across several dimensions of space and time. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Young crystal child, she said without looking at him. You seek dangerous knowledge. I seek truth, Elder Quainara. Sometimes they are the same thing. She turned several of her multi-dimensional eyes toward him. You want to know about the human protocols? Yes. And you believe you have the right to this knowledge simply because you ask for it? Velther hesitated. I believe all council members have the right to understand the rules that govern us. Quainara made a sound that might have been laughter. Ah, the innocence of youth. Very well, young one. I will tell you what I can, though I fear you will not thank me for it. She gestured with one wing toward a nearby bench. Velther sat down, his crystal body humming with nervous energy. 50 years ago, Quainara began, humans joined our council. They seemed pleasant enough, curious, adaptable, eager to learn. They followed all our protocols without complaint. They surrendered their primitive weapons and underwent the same security procedures as everyone else. What changed? An event we call the Soul Incident. Quainara's wings flickered with what looked like remembered fear. There was a terrorist attack during a council session. A group of extremists from the Void cults managed to infiltrate the chamber with weapons that our scanners couldn't detect. Velther leaned forward. What happened? The attackers took hostages. They threatened to kill everyone in the chamber unless we agreed to their demands. Our security forces were helpless. The cultists had positioned themselves perfectly, using the chamber's own design against us. How were they stopped? Quainara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. The humans stopped them. How? That, Quainara said, is where the classified information begins. She stood up, her multiple wings catching the artificial light. I will tell you this much, young Velther, because you seem determined to pursue this path regardless of the consequences. The humans neutralized the threat using nothing but items that were already in the chamber. Everyday objects. Things that had passed through our security scanners without triggering any alarms. Velther felt a chill run through his crystal structure. What kind of objects? Ceremonial pens, decorative crystals, pieces of clothing, furniture components. Quainara's voice grew even quieter. They turned a diplomatic chamber into an arsenal in less than 10 minutes. But surely that was just luck. Improvisation under extreme circumstances. Quainara's laugh this time was not pleasant. That's what we thought too. Until we asked them to demonstrate how they did it. And they did it again. And again. And again. Each time using different objects, different methods. It became clear that what we had witnessed wasn't luck or desperation. It was simply how their minds work. Velther stood up slowly, his crystal body dimming with the weight of understanding. They see weapons everywhere. Not just weapons, Quinara corrected. They see potential. In everything. Every object, every situation, every relationship. They don't just adapt to their environment. They transform it into whatever they need it to be. So the Council decided they couldn't be disarmed. The Council decided, Quinara said carefully, that attempting to disarm a human was like trying to disarm their mind. And a species that can turn anything into a weapon is far too dangerous to make an enemy of. Velther felt his world shifting around him. So we trust them. We trust them, Quinara agreed, because we have no other choice. And because, despite their terrifying capabilities, they have consistently chosen to use them in our defense rather than against us. As Velther left the garden, his mind raced with new questions. But now he understood why the others had tried to warn him away from seeking answers. Some truths were indeed too dangerous to know. Velther couldn't sleep for 3 days after his conversation with Quinara. Every time he closed his optical sensors, he saw the same image. Humans walking calmly through the council chamber while unconsciously cataloging everything around them as potential weapons. On the 4th day, he made a decision that would change everything. He went to see Thrakvon, the council's security chief. Thrakvon was a massive being from a species known for their multiple arms and natural armor plating. His office was located deep within the station's security sector, surrounded by the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy. Delegate Velther, Thrakvon said as he entered, I was wondering when you would come to see me. You were expecting. And me? After your questions in the council chamber, and your visits to the archive and the Garden of Memory, yes. Word travels fast in a closed environment like this. Thrakvon gestured to a chair with 2 of his 4 arms. Please, sit. I assume you want to know about the Soul incident. Velther settled into the chair, his crystal body reflecting the harsh lights of the security office. Quinara told me some of it, but I need to understand more. I need to see what actually happened. Thrakvon was quiet for a long moment, his multiple arms moving in patterns that suggested deep thought. The security footage from that day is classified at the highest levels. Showing it to you would require special authorization. Then get the authorization. You don't understand the implications of what you're asking for. Then help me understand. Thrakvon stood up and moved to a secure terminal on the far wall. His fingers worked across multiple keypads simultaneously. Very well. But before I show you anything, you need to meet the humans who were there that day. Within an hour, 3 humans sat in Thrakvon's office alongside Velther. The first was Cho Min, now in his 70s, but still sharp-eyed and alert. He had been a junior engineer 50 years ago, attending his first council session. The second was Han Sol, who had served as a cultural attaché and was known for his dark sense of humor. The third was a woman named Kang Wei, who had been working as a security liaison. So, Han Sol said with a slight smile, You want to know why we're considered too dangerous to disarm? I want to understand what happened during the Soul incident. Velther replied. Cho Min laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Soul incident. We've been living with that name for 50 years. Do you know why they called it that? No, because that's where I was born. Soul on Earth. The media decided that since I was the one who built the first device, the whole event should be named after my hometown. Cho Min shook his head. My poor mother never got over the embarrassment. Kang Wei leaned forward. Before we show you anything, you need to understand something. What we did that day wasn't planned. We didn't wake up thinking we'd have to fight terrorists with office supplies. We just did what came naturally. What came naturally? Velther asked. Problem solving, Han Sol said simply. Humans are very good at problem solving. Thrakvon activated a holographic display in the center of the room. This is the council chamber on the day of the incident. The attackers entered during a routine session about mining rights. The display showed the chamber filled with delegates from hundreds of species. Everything looked normal until figures in dark clothing appeared from several entrances simultaneously. They moved with military precision, and Velthur could see weapons that looked unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Void cult technology, Thrakvon explained. Made from materials that don't exist in normal space. Our scanners couldn't detect them because they literally weren't there until the moment they were used. On the display, chaos erupted as the cultists took control of key positions around the chamber. Velthur watched in horror as they began selecting hostages from different species. Now watch the humans, Cho-Min said quietly. Velthur focused on the human delegation. While other species were panicking or trying to hide, the humans were doing something different. They were looking around, not frantically, but with purpose. Their eyes moved systematically across the chamber, cataloging, analyzing, planning. There, Kang Wei pointed to her younger self on the display. That's when I realized we were on our own. Security couldn't get to us because of how the cultists had positioned themselves. So we had to improvise. Watch my hands, Cho-Min said. The display, the younger Cho-Min was calmly removing his ceremonial necktie. At the same time, he was reaching for items on the desk in front of him. A council pen, some decorative crystals that were part of the chamber's design, and what looked like a small piece of jewelry. What are you doing? Velthur asked. Making a directed electromagnetic pulse device, Cho-Min replied casually. The crystals were resonant frequency generators. The pen contained conductive materials, and my necktie had metallic threads woven into it for decoration. Put them together correctly, and you can overload the power systems in a localized area. Velthur stared at him. You built a weapon from a tie and some decorations? In about 3 minutes, Han Sol added helpfully, while I was working on something else. The display showed Han Sol dismantling a chair, his movements quick and efficient. What were you making? Projectile launcher. The chair's support struts made excellent barrel components, and the cushioning material could be compressed into high-density projectiles. Not lethal, but very effective for disorienting targets. Meanwhile, Kang Wei was doing something with her datapad and what looked like pieces of her own clothing. Chemical irritant dispersal system, she explained, seeing Velthur's confused expression. My datapad's power cell, combined with certain synthetic materials in my clothing, could produce a gas that would affect the respiratory systems of most species. Harmless, but very unpleasant. You're telling me, Velthur said slowly, that in the space of a few minutes, while under attack, you built 3 different weapons from random objects? 4 weapons, Cho-Min corrected. You missed what Han Sol did with the water fountain. Velthur looked back at the display. In one corner of the chamber, Han Sol had somehow modified a decorative water feature. Sonic weapon, Han Sol explained with pride. Changed the frequency and amplitude of the water circulation system. Could produce sounds that would be extremely painful to most alien hearing systems. But that's impossible, Velthur protested. You can't just improvise complex weapons from random materials. The 3 humans looked at each other and smiled. Show him the rest, Thrakvon said grimly. The display continued. Velthur watched in amazement as the humans implemented their improvised plan with military precision. Cho-Min's electromagnetic pulse disabled the cultists' exotic weapons. Han Sol's projectile launcher created confusion in their ranks. Kang Wei's chemical dispersal system forced them to retreat to specific positions, where Han Sol's sonic weapon could affect them most effectively. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, All the cultists were unconscious or incapacitated, and not a single hostage had been seriously harmed. The Council's response was swift, Thrakvon said. They wanted to understand how humans had done what our professional security forces couldn't. So they asked us to demonstrate, Cho-Min said. They brought us back to the chamber a week later, gave us different random objects, and asked us to show them how we'd built our weapons. And we did it again, Han Sol said simply. Different objects, different weapons, same result. So they tried again with completely different materials. And again, Kang Wei added. And again. Eventually, they realized that the specific objects didn't matter. We could work with whatever was available. Velther felt his crystal structure vibrating with shock. But surely this was just because you're engineers or security specialists, the humans laughed. I was a cultural attach, Han Sol reminded him. My job was to help other species understand human art and literature. I was a junior engineer, Cho-Min said. I maintained air circulation systems. And I was a security liaison, not a weapons expert, Kang Wei added. My job was to make sure human delegates didn't accidentally offend anyone. Then how? Because, Cho-Min said gently, this is just how human minds work. We see problems, and we automatically start thinking about solutions. We look at our environment, and we see potential, not just for weapons, but for tools, shelter, communication, transportation, anything we might need. Every human thinks this way? Every human, Kang Wei confirmed. It's not special training or unique talent. It's just human nature. Thrakvon deactivated the display. After the demonstrations, the Council faced a difficult decision. They could try to limit human access to materials, essentially keeping them in empty rooms, or they could trust them not to abuse their capabilities. They chose trust, Velther said quietly. They chose survival, Han Sol corrected. Because a species that can turn anything into a weapon is not a species you want to make angry. As Velther left the security office, his mind reeled with the implications of what he'd learned. Humans weren't just allowed to keep their weapons because they were trusted allies. They were allowed to keep their weapons because everything around them was already a weapon, and they were the only ones who knew how to use it. The revelation about the Soul incident was just the beginning. Over the next week, Velther found himself seeing humans differently everywhere he went on the station. What had once seemed like normal behavior now appeared far more complex and potentially dangerous. He was having lunch in the station's main cafeteria when he noticed Bayuna, a human xenobiologist, giving what appeared to be a casual presentation to a group of new council interns from various species. Velther moved closer to listen. Now, the Grexmore have fascinating respiratory systems, Bayuna was saying in a cheerful voice. They breathe through specialized slits along their thorax. These slits are incredibly sensitive to pressure changes. Even a small disruption can cause temporary paralysis. She gestured to a holographic display showing Grexmore anatomy. The interesting thing is how their nervous system connects to their respiratory function. A sharp sound at exactly 847 hertz will cause their breathing slits to close involuntarily. It's a defensive reflex, but it leaves them helpless for about 30 seconds. One of the interns, a young Velther like himself, asked, "Is this information useful for medical treatment?" "Oh yes," Bayuna smiled. "Very useful for understanding how to help them in emergencies. For instance, if a Grexmore was in distress, you could calm them by playing soft sounds at 200 hertz, which relaxes their respiratory system." She moved on to the next species. The crystalline Velther have a completely different vulnerability. Characteristic. Your crystal matrix can be disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies. It's not harmful, but it can cause temporary disorientation and loss of motor control. Velther felt his crystal body growing cold as he listened. The frequency is 15.7 kilohertz, pulsed at 3-second intervals. Bayuna continued conversationally. Interestingly, this frequency can be generated by modifying most standard communication devices. Just a small adjustment to the transmission. Settings. Another intern asked, "What about humans? What are your vulnerabilities?" Bayuna laughed. "Humans are wonderfully fragile. We can be incapacitated by impacts, toxins, extreme temperatures, oxygen deprivation, and dozens of other methods. But the interesting thing about humans is that we're aware of our vulnerabilities, so we've developed ways to protect against most of them." She continued through the presentation, cheerfully describing the pressure points, chemical sensitivities, and biological weaknesses of every major species in the Council. To most observers, it would have seemed like an educational lecture about alien biology. To Velther, it sounded like a comprehensive guide to incapacitating every species in the galaxy. After the presentation ended, Velther approached Bayuna. "That was a very informative lecture." "Thank you," she said brightly. "I love sharing knowledge about our wonderful diversity. Each species has such unique and fascinating characteristics. You seem to know a lot about how to affect these characteristics." Bayuna's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "I study xenobiology, Delegate Velther. Understanding how different species function is essential for proper medical care and emergency response." "Of course," Velther said carefully. "I was just wondering, do all humans have this kind of detailed knowledge about other species?" "Most of us pick up quite a bit over time. We're naturally curious about how things work." She paused. "Is there something specific you wanted to know?" "I've been learning about human capabilities lately. The Soul incident, for instance." Bayuna's expression became more serious. "Ah, you're the one who's been asking questions. People keep telling me that humans are dangerous because you can make weapons from anything. But listening to your presentation, I'm starting to think the problem is bigger than that." "In what way?" Velther looked around the busy cafeteria, filled with dozens of species going about their daily lives. "You don't just see objects as potential weapons. You see other beings as potential targets. You unconsciously catalog our weaknesses." "We catalog everything," Bayuna corrected gently. "Strengths, weaknesses, preferences, behaviors. It's how we understand the world around us." "But you focus on the weaknesses. We focus on survival," she said. "It's a very human trait. We assess threats and advantages automatically, even when we don't intend to, even when we don't want to." That afternoon, Velther found himself in the archive again, this time requesting historical records about human integration into the Council. Park Ji-ho was helpful as always, pulling up files that weren't classified. "Here's something interesting," Park Ji-ho said, pointing to a document on his screen. "This is a report from the first year after humans joined the Council. It mentions several incidents where human delegates accidentally caused diplomatic problems." "What kind of problems?" "Well, there was Ambassador Li Min, who nearly caused an interstellar incident by correctly predicting which member of the Zephyrian delegation was planning to betray their government. Turns out she had just been making casual conversation, but she'd unconsciously analyzed their behavior patterns and body language." Park Ji-ho scrolled through more files. "And there was Dr. Song Ji, who caused panic at a medical conference by casually mentioning 17 different ways the station's life support systems could be sabotaged. He thought he was being helpful by pointing out security vulnerabilities. These were accidents? Completely unintentional. The humans involved had no idea they were causing problems. They were just being human." Park Ji-ho opened another file. "Here's a fascinating one. A human cultural expert named Yang He was asked to help improve interspecies communication. Her recommendations included detailed psychological profiles of each species, including their fears, motivations, and decision-making. Patterns. That sounds helpful. It was. But the other species realized that the same information could be used to manipulate them. Yang He had essentially created a manual for psychological warfare, and she thought she was just improving cultural understanding. Velther left the archive with a growing sense of unease. That evening, he attended a council social gathering, watching human behavior with new eyes. He saw Kim Dai engaged in friendly conversation with delegates from 6 different species. But now Velther noticed how Kim Dai adjusted his tone, posture, and choice of words for each species. The Grexmoor got firm, direct statements. The Melody folk received flowing, harmonious speech patterns. The gas-breathing Zephyrians were addressed with careful consideration of their atmospheric requirements. It looked like skillful diplomacy. But Velther realized it was also precise psychological manipulation, even if Kim Dai didn't think of it that way. At another table, Yoon Hana was discussing station security with Thrakvine. Her suggestions for improving safety protocols were intelligent and well-reasoned. But Velther noticed that she somehow knew exactly where every security camera was located, which corridors had the best sight lines, and how long it would take security forces to respond to different areas of the station. The humans weren't trying to be threatening. They were just being themselves. But themselves included an unconscious tendency to analyze, categorize, and optimize everything around them, including other sentient beings. Late that night, Velther made his way to the observation deck where Quenara often came to think. He found her there, her multiple wings catching starlight from the windows. "You've learned more," she said without turning around. "I've learned that the Soul incident was just the beginning," Velther replied. "Humans don't just turn objects into weapons. They turn information into weapons. They turn relationships into weapons. They turn their own diplomatic status into weapons. Now you begin to understand. They're not even doing it on purpose." "No," Quinara agreed. "That's what makes them so terrifying and so valuable." "How do you mean?" Quinara finally turned to face him. "A species that weaponizes everything by instinct is incredibly dangerous. But a species that does so without malicious intent, and that consistently chooses not to use those weapons against their allies, is the most powerful defensive force imaginable." "You mean they protect us?" "They protect us from threats we don't even know exist yet. Because when danger comes, they'll find ways to fight it that the rest of us would never think of. Using resources we didn't know we had. Exploiting weaknesses in our enemies that we didn't know existed." Velther looked out at the stars. "So we keep them close." "We keep them close," Quinara confirmed. "Because a species that can turn anything into a weapon is either your greatest enemy or your greatest protector. And we chose very carefully which one we wanted them to be." As Velther made his way back to his quarters, he realized that his questions had led him to an uncomfortable truth. Humans weren't trusted despite being dangerous. They were trusted because they were dangerous. 2 weeks after his investigation began, Velther found himself back in the council chamber for an emergency session. Reports had come in of pirate attacks on the Outer Rim, and several species were demanding military action. As he took his seat, Velther noticed how different everything looked now that he understood what he was seeing. The human delegation sat in their usual section, looking calm and professional. But Velther could now see what he had missed before. Kim Dai wasn't just listening to the debates. He was analyzing them. His eyes moved constantly, reading body language, noting which delegates were nervous, which ones were lying, and which ones might be hiding something important. Yoon Hana appeared to be taking simple notes, but Velther realized she was probably mapping out the power dynamics in the room, identifying potential allies and threats, and planning responses to various scenarios that might develop. The other humans were doing the same thing, each in their own way. They couldn't help it. It was just how their minds worked. "The pirates are using new technology," announced Delegate Thorgrim from the warrior species known for their military prowess. "Our traditional tactics are useless against them. We need to develop new weapons, new strategies." Several other delegates voiced agreement. The discussion quickly became heated as different species proposed different approaches. Some wanted to build bigger weapons. Others suggested defensive measures. A few recommended negotiation. Through it all, the humans remained quiet. Finally, Elder Zerikanal called for calm. "Does anyone have practical suggestions for dealing with this threat?" Kim Day stood up slowly. "If I may, Elder, I'd like to ask a few questions about these pirates." "Proceed. What kind of ships are they using? What are their attack patterns? How do they choose their targets?" Kim Day's voice was calm and professional. "Also, where do they go after their attacks? How do they dispose of stolen goods? What do we know about their supply chains?" Delegate Thorgrim looked confused. "I don't see how those details matter. We need weapons to fight them." "Fighting them is certainly one option," Kim Day agreed. "But before we decide on any particular approach, it would be helpful to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Kim Day asked dozens of questions. Not about weapons or military tactics, but about logistics, economics, and behavior patterns. The humans took careful notes as other delegates provided answers. Velthur watched in fascination. As a picture emerged, the pirates weren't just random raiders. They were operating with sophisticated coordination, using advanced technology, and following patterns that suggested someone was organizing them. Based on this information, Kim Day finally said, "I don't think we're dealing with ordinary pirates." "What do you mean?" Elder Zerikanel asked. "The attack patterns, the technology, the logistics. This looks more like a military operation disguised as piracy. Someone is using these raids to test our defenses and gather intelligence." The chamber erupted in alarmed discussion. Several delegates demanded to know who would do such a thing. Yoon, Hannah stood up. "If Ambassador Kim Day is correct, then the question isn't how to fight pirates. The question is how to stop a covert military operation without starting a full-scale war. Do you have suggestions?" Elder Zerikanel asked. "Several," Kim Day replied. "But first, we need to verify our suspicions. I recommend we set up a monitoring operation to track the pirates' movements and identify their base of operations." "How? Do we do that without them knowing?" Kim Day smiled slightly. "We use their own tactics against them. We make them think they're winning while we gather the information we need." Over the next several hours, the humans laid out a detailed plan. It was complex, multi-layered, and unlike anything the Council had ever attempted. Instead of direct military confrontation, they proposed a strategy involving economics, psychology, and misdirection. They would allow the pirates to capture specific targets that had been prepared with hidden tracking devices. They would manipulate trade routes to force the pirates into predictable patterns. They would use the pirates' own communication systems against them by feeding false information through carefully chosen channels. "This is incredibly elaborate," commented Delegate Thorgrim. "Wouldn't it be simpler to just hunt them down and destroy them?" "Possibly," Kim Day admitted. "But our approach has several advantages. First, it will give us definitive proof of who's behind the attacks. Second, it will allow us to capture the pirates alive for questioning. Third, it will demonstrate to whoever is organizing this that covert operations against the Council are futile. And if your plan fails, then we'll know more about our enemies than we did before, and we can adjust our strategy accordingly." Yoon Hana added, "The beauty of this approach is that even if the pirates figure out what we're doing, the information we gather in the process will still be valuable. Velther realized he was witnessing something remarkable. The humans weren't just solving the immediate problem of pirate attacks. They were turning the entire situation into an intelligence-gathering operation that would make the Council stronger regardless of the outcome. After the session ended, Velther approached Kim Day in the corridor outside the chamber. "That was impressive," he said. "Thank you," Kim Day replied. "Though I should point out that the plan will only work if the other species are willing to trust us with the implementation." "They'll trust you," Velther said with certainty. "They have to." Kim Day gave him a curious look. "You sound different than you did 2 weeks ago." "I've learned some things about humans since then." "Such as?" Velther was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've learned that you can't help being what you are. You see everything as a potential tool, every situation as a puzzle to be solved, every problem as an opportunity to gather more information. And that bothers you?" "It terrified me at first," Velther admitted. "The idea that every human is essentially a walking weapons laboratory, constantly analyzing threats and opportunities without even realizing it. But not anymore? Now I understand why the Council made the choice they did 50 years ago." Velther's crystal body flickered with what might have been amusement. "You're not allowed to keep your weapons because you're trusted. You're allowed to keep your weapons because trying to take them away would be pointless." Kim Day nodded slowly. "We are what we are. And what you are," Velther continued, "is a species that automatically turns every challenge into an advantage, every threat into an opportunity, and every enemy's strength into their weakness. The Council realized that having you as allies was infinitely preferable to having you as enemies." "Some might see that as a threat. Some might," Velther agreed. "But I've seen how you use your capabilities. You had dozens of opportunities over the past 50 years to exploit your advantages for purely human benefit. Instead, you've consistently used them to protect the Council as a whole." Kim Day was quiet for a moment. "We chose to be part of something larger than ourselves. And that choice," Velther said, "is why everyone else can sleep peacefully at night." Later that evening, Velther found himself once again in the Garden of Memory with Kinara. The ancient being was resting beside the musical fountain, her multiple wings reflecting the soft light. "Your investigation is complete," she observed. "Yes. And what have you concluded?" Velther settled beside her, his crystal body resonating softly with the fountain's harmonies. "I've concluded that the Council's most important decision wasn't about weapons or security protocols. It was about trust." "Explain." "Every species in the galaxy has natural weapons or advantages. But most of us are limited by our biology, our technology, or our thinking patterns. Humans are limited only by their imagination and their moral choices." Quinara made a sound that might have been agreement. "And what does that mean for the Council?" "It means we have the most powerful defensive force in the galaxy, as long as we deserve their protection." Velther paused. "And it means that our continued survival depends not on their inability to harm us, but on their decision not to. Are you comfortable with that arrangement?" Velther considered the question carefully. "I'm comfortable with it, because I've seen the choices they make. Every day, humans choose cooperation over domination, protection over exploitation, and the good of the Council over their own immediate advantages. And if they ever chose differently, then we'd be in serious trouble," Velther admitted. "But I don't think they will. Not because they can't, but because choosing differently would make them something they don't want to be." As he prepared to leave the garden, Quinara spoke one final time. "You asked why humans are the only species allowed to be weaponless in council chambers," she said. "Have you found your answer?" Velther stopped at the garden's entrance and looked back at the ancient being. "Yes," he said. "They're allowed to be weaponless because they're never actually weaponless. Every human carries the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, an unrestricted imagination combined with the wisdom to use it responsibly. And that, Quinara said softly, is why we sleep peacefully at night. As Velthar made his way back to his quarters, he reflected on everything he had learned. The Council's security protocols weren't really about preventing violence. They were about managing relationships and maintaining trust between species with vastly different capabilities.